Welcome everyone to another in our advanced OpenAir user webinar series. Today's topic is advanced OpenAir reporting, and we've got a big response to this webinar. A lot of people have signed up, so I'm really happy to see this still being a very popular topic. So here's what we're going to cover today. Some topics you may have heard covered in other parts of webinars, because reporting is always something that gets factored in whenever you're working with the OpenAir system. But we're going to focus on specific features that you may or may not know about or are using today, and give you some examples of how those features can be used. Specifically default values. Many of you may not even realize that there's a control mechanism in some of the value settings on some of your reports. We'll go through advanced reporting values, a very big feature that you should be taking advantage of in the system. Some special reporting features, some time periods, custom time ranges, date effective custom field reporting that you may need, some extended date filter topics, and then touch on the topic of detailed report subtotaling. I don't think this is leveraged enough, so you may find some uses in your system. And then the ultimate question of, do you actually need a report for the information you're trying to find in the system? Sometimes it's simply a matter of people understanding how to customize their data views in certain modules, or even in fact turning on some features in modules so that you can look it up dynamically without using a report. So the default values, what do I mean by default values? So the default values are a series of fields. They're both date and settings that are available on summary reports. And when you look at the summary report form, it's right below the available value list, but right above where you start subtotaling. And just to let everyone know, I'm actually using the report interface as has been standard in OpenAir for many years. There is a new reporting wizard. It changes the user interface and how you work with these reports, but for the most part, a lot of these field values are still the same. So in the summary report, you'll probably skim through this pretty quickly whenever you scroll down the form to fill out a report, but it does have some very important things to pay attention to regarding invoice values, how invoice values, timesheet values, and so forth are being pulled and included on the report. This is separate and additional to the filtering options that you have and the date ranges that you're using to do the report in general. Okay, so we'll talk about some examples. OpenAir defaults these for an 80% solution, right? So when you first get your system, all these values do have, all these fields do have a value, but they may not meet the need of what you need the report to include. So I'm going to highlight one in particular that I think a lot of people just sort of forget to check. Okay. And that's the invoice charges. So if you look at the list that's on the screen here, you'll see charges to include for invoice values, and it defaults to all charges. So those of you who are working with invoices in OpenAir, there is a kind of a progression of what a charge is in the system. And a charge can be open, which means it's not captured on an invoice yet, and it can be billed or invoiced. And in fact, when you pull down this menu, it does have the option of all charges, open charges, and invoice charges. And the value of that field makes a big difference as to what you see on an invoice report. Okay? So let me, I'm just going to go into the system because I have a session set up, and I set up some example reports to demonstrate some of these features. And in fact, here's an invoice defaults feature. So I'm going to show you what I set up for the report to look like. And I'm pulling the two basic fields that OpenAir has when it comes to reporting. One is called total invoiced, and one is called total. The big difference here is total invoiced only talks about invoice charges, and total talks about all charges. So if I left the default as it stands with the value of all charges in this drop-down menu, and we'll talk about dates, but there's a variety of dates that you can use to include in these values, the charge date, the invoice date, and so forth. And I run this report, lo and behold, I get two columns of data, which is great, and they're exactly the same. The total invoiced and the invoices total are exactly the same. which makes me feel pretty good. But let me show you when I make one small change to that drop-down. And I'm going to say I want to look at open charges. What have I not invoiced yet? And then I'm going to run it. So look at the difference between those two values now. The total invoice field is still pulling the value of the invoices that have been invoiced. It ignores that drop-down. But the second column, which was just give me the total of the invoiced amounts, that's showing 0 because that's paying attention to that column. That's paying attention to that drop-down. Since I changed it from all charges to open, I don't have any open charges, so therefore this is showing 0. So you can imagine as you're writing reports, check and see which field you're using for invoices and make sure you understand how the behavior of that is going to work with those drop-down values. The other thing I see a lot of people just accept the dates when they should think about it as far as impact to financials, for example, are things like expense reports. I think I have this one set up. So I have this expense report, and I set up, I basically want to know what are my August expenses. Okay, so I wrote this report, and I have a list of receipts that show me for the last week of August I have a total of $720 worth of receipts in the system. But let me show you what it's looking at in the system. So I said, okay, for the month of August, August 31st is my end date. And if I look at the date that I'm using for expenses, I'm actually using the receipt date. Okay, fine. At the receipt date, it's any receipt that's after August 31st is not going to be included in this report. But what if and that's the default, but what if I change this to the expense report date? Because realistically, people are submitting the expense report for that week perhaps, or for that entire trip. And the expense report date may have a mixture of months of data on it. And when I run the report now, the information is much different because although I told the report to stop at the end of August, it's paying attention to the expense report date, and the expense report date is August. But the expense report is for a week that expands beyond the month of August. In fact, this week ends on September 3rd. So it's pulling all the expenses up to September 3rd. Okay? This is a big difference on a report, especially for financials, between $700 and almost $3,000. So look at those date fields if you haven't noticed them before, and make sure that it's indexing into the right date or the right type of field that you want to include on the reports, and make sure that the field that you're reporting on actually does pay attention to those dates. If you've attended other reporting sessions or you have attended a few of the other expert webinar series, we eventually talk about reporting, and one of the big things in the reporting world of OpenAir is some of the standard fields are not giving you exactly what you want. You got invoiced fees, invoiced expenses. You get timesheet hours, you get billed hours and unbilled hours, but you really want billable hours, which may not be the same as billed hours in your world. You want vacation hours. You want consulting revenue. You want how close did people come to achieving their target utilization, all of which you can certainly get by downloading a standard report and fiddling around with stuff in Excel, but that's not what you want to do. You want to be able to leverage the system. Okay. OpenAir actually can be expanded quite easily from the standard field of reporting to include what's called custom calculations. And there are a lot of feature enhancements that have happened over the years with custom calculations to make them very, very useful in reporting values. So what am I talking about? Quite a few of you are using custom calculations, but as we work with customers, one of the first things that we check is the use of this filter feature on custom calculations. The switch is called Report Filters on Custom Calculations. It's an internal switch. And we really encourage you, even if you haven't had a need to use these yet, turn them on your custom calculations, because you will be surprised at how much and how creative you can be on the ways that you can get reports in the system. Why is this so darn important? A custom calculation in the system allows you to combine values to create a new field. It allows you to create combined fields with some type of filtering so that the information in a specific field is already filtered. Let's take that example I showed you just previously on the total invoiced value. That total invoiced value is a standard OpenAir field, and that standard field only looks at invoiced charges. Okay? Wouldn't it be great if you could create a standard total invoiced for consulting revenue field? And that when you include that field on your report, it already filters and only pulls in consulting information. You can do that with these advanced reporting values. So I'll walk you through an example of a feature setup, but basically the custom calculation, you define the equation. You can use filters to sort of refine the type of data that's included in that calculation. And in some cases, you may find yourself needing to create an equation that does nothing. Okay? One of the equation values or operators that are available in a custom calculation is called no operation. Unfortunately, that is non-functional, so you still have to create an equation. And the reason sometimes you want to create an equation is you really do want consulting revenue. And consulting revenue is just what revenue have I recognized filtered by maybe a service type. Okay? But it's a field filtered by something. You have to create an equation for you to filter it. So the equation is the revenue that you've generated times 1 or minus 0 or divided by 1 or whatever you can come up with. But it's one of those basic math things that you learned in the 3rd grade, where how do you get the same value in an equation? So something times 1 is the something. And so to fulfill that requirement, you find yourself having to create these constants in OpenAir. And I'll walk you through an example of what we've done in the system to pull out consulting revenue as a field that we define on our reports. So the custom fields are actually, the constants are actually something called custom detail fields, which are part of the whole custom calculation functionality in OpenAir. But it gives you the ability to create these constants, these values of 1, so times 1. The trick for this is that whatever constant you set, you can tell that you have to associate it with a type of item. Okay? So this is a constant 1 of a time entry, a constant 1 of a charge, a constant 1 of a booking. And the reason you need all those different constants of 1 is basically sort of mixing and matching things to make sure that you still come out with the same unit. So if I'm dealing with time, so time times a constant of 1 piece of time still gives me a unit of time. If I'm dealing with billing, billing charges times 1 charge still gives me a unit of charges. OpenAir will actually allow you to mix and match units, but unfortunately when you mix and match units, you can't summarize data, and some of the reports that you definitely generate in the system, you want to roll things up by department or by region. You want to roll up total invoice amounts by company or country. And unless you make sure that all the units line up in an equation, you can't get that summary value. So let me just show you an example to help illustrate the point. And I wrote this report, and it shows 2 values. One is a standard OpenAir value, and one is a custom value that I created. And total invoice we've already talked about, but the consulting revenue, or the piece of the invoicing that we've recognized as revenue related to consulting. That value, when I hover over it, doesn't tell me anything. You can always tell custom calculations from regular calculations in OpenAir. If you hover over the field, the definition comes up if it's standard. If it's a custom, it just sometimes nothing comes up. In this case, it's money, so at least it comes up with the currency. So how did I define that consulting revenue? So I'm using the administration module. Those of you on the account module, you'd go under company and then calculated custom calculations or calculated fields subtab. And here I've got consulting revenue. How did I define that consulting revenue field? My revenue in my company is T&M, so we do as billed basically. So I just said, give me all my invoice fees, which is the labor that I've incurred, times 1. So here I am with that constant. I'm really just looking to redefine an invoice field with a piece. I want to filter it on a piece. And when I say I filter it on a piece, when I scroll down, if I look at my service definition, I only want invoice fees that are related to consulting. Okay? And then invoice fees related to consulting times 1 will give me that definition of consulting revenue. So let's go look at this 1. How did I get that 1 in the system? That's a custom detailed field. The custom detailed field I associate that with a charge. The reason it's a charge is because I want to keep the units correct, and invoice fees are a charge type item. 1, and then you make sure you pick a ratio. Don't click this approve apply constant, because when you do that, every transaction that's multiplied will actually make a multiple of it. So if there's 4 records, it'll multiply it 4 times, and it's not 4 times 1, it's 4, the number 4 times the number. So when you're doing these constants, make sure you leave that unchecked. And then save. So I've created my 1 charge. Then I was able to create my custom calculation to basically filter on invoice fees times that charge. And now I have a whole other field called consulting revenue. And I certainly can repeat this for the different types of services I have, or even convert my hours to the different types of hours that I track. If you're using task types, that's a great way to filter information by task type to define these new columns of data. And that's exactly what you're doing on these reports, is you're creating a column of data that is useful for you to include in reports. Okay? Other pieces of information that you would want to create new fields is maybe combining fields. I do forecasting in my system, but I also want to look at actuals. I want to look at a full financial year. So, of course, anything before October is actuals, and anything after September is forecast for me. And I use custom calculations to basically add actual plus forecast so I get a full financial year. And the details of how that was set up is actually in the forecasting webinar we did, about 11 months ago now. I think it was one of our first ones. So plenty of details in that webinar also. And so once you've actually gotten those custom calculations defined, now they show up in the list of available values. Everything shows up. That's, I guess, if there was a downside to this, that would be the downside, is you see how the constants show up, the new values that you really do want to report on show up. So you really have to educate the people who are working with reports to make sure they understand why there's probably some fields in this available values area that you don't want to report on, simply because they're sort of pieces of an equation type thing. In fact, I've worked with some customers, and some best practices I would like to pass on related to this is when there is a custom calculation, there's usually a naming convention that people are starting to adopt, which I think is quite clever. Like putting a -C at the end or something helps people identify very quickly that, oh, this is a custom calculation. And if you're not quite sure what it's supposed to do, you can always go and find out the definition of it. Okay. So I also want to introduce a special reporting feature that some people may not know about. I do find, working with customers, that many times there's a need to multiply by a percentage to get a fraction or a weighted value in reports. So a lot of times this may be done by a drop-down because you want to make sure people select a specific amount of percentages, like 10, 20, 50, 70, and so forth. I've also seen people use numeric custom fields, and numeric custom fields allow you to type whatever, but 10, 20, or maybe ratio fields, 0.1, so forth. And then those fields are used in custom calculations to do reports, okay, or create new reports in the system. One thing that I don't think enough people know about is there's actually a field type, a custom field type called Allocation Grid. If it's not turned on in your system, it's something you can have OpenAir support activate. But the benefit of using this Allocation Grid is it automatically provides you weighted values in OpenAir standard fields. So you don't have to really even create custom calculations to multiply by the percentage. They're already available. So I know I have that in my system, and when you have an Allocation Grid, you may notice, or if you haven't turned it on, when you turn it on, you'll notice a new little thing show up underneath the available values box. And when you do that, it's a exclude or include, and it defaults to exclude. But when you click on include, if you look at a little bit of this screenshot, and I'll show you another example in our system, when you click on the include, you see that any value that has like a number associated with it, especially money, you'll see that it also gives you a weighted value of it, which means the system will multiply it for you, and if you just pick this field on your report, it's already got the multiplication taken care of for your allocation. So you don't have to create those custom calculations. And in fact, all of these reports, all of these weighted values will actually roll up because they're standard OpenAir fields now. So if you take a look at I'll just use the same report that we were looking at. So here's the Allocation Grid generated field. And for those of you who aren't familiar with Allocation Grids, let me just show you very quickly what those are. So when you create an allocation grid, you have to give it some kind of value to hold the field, and then it's thinking it's a percentage. So we have a little bit of a hint below there based on our methodology. So depending on where this is, make sure you put the right value in here. There's nothing stopping people from putting 72 or 95 or anything, but as long as people can hopefully follow direction, which my team can, we make sure that we have this value, something that we like to keep track of. So when you have that value in the system, now I'm going to turn this include on, and what's going to happen is the screen's going to refresh, and it's going to repopulate that available values, but now anything that's got money in it shows the weighted value automatically. Okay? The one thing that may have just jumped out at you when you were looking at me scroll down is the custom calculations don't automatically get the weighting value because custom calculations are not standard OpenAir fields, so therefore it can't apply the standards. So you could always go back and fix your calculation. But here, instead of total invoiced values, I could actually take total invoice times weighted if I want to do something crazy like that and then run the report. And in fact, I think I have a report that I would like to show you right here, this weighted one. So this is how we keep track. We include the weighted value so we know where things are as far as maturity is concerned. And then the value that's reported on the system is on the screen here is actually the amount of the budget times the weighted value and then whatever the forecasting is. So like here's a $9,000 US opportunity. It's actually forecasting at only $900 to my sales pipeline, and it's split across 2 months. So this is how you can actually have OpenAir compute the probability or percentage automatically for you just by turning on this allocation grid. It is only available, it's best used on the project, I'll definitely say that, and it's most commonly used on the project. So it allows you to do these kind of reports very easily. So time periods. let's go back. So time periods, for some of you that are using OpenAir, if you deployed the system with this requirement, you're already familiar with this feature. But for those of you who follow sort of a standard calendar, Q1 is January through March and so forth, you may not be as much familiar with this concept of time period customization or custom time ranges. So, just to kind of put it in perspective, OpenAir's time periods are, I like to call it Hallmark calendar. Monthly is the 1st to the 31st or the 28th or the 30th, whatever that month is. Weekly is whatever you've defined a week to be, Sunday to Saturday, Monday to Sunday, Saturday to Friday, whatever. The year-to-date periods all depend on January 1st in OpenAir. The inception to date is where you can definitely, it picks up the first time entry or something at the beginning of a project regardless of when it happened. But those are just standard time period definitions. And when you run reports, sometimes you're looking year-to-date, sometimes you're wanting inception to date, sometimes you're wanting 4 weeks, and so forth and so on. Custom time ranges allow you to play with those. Okay, it doesn't redefine what a month is, but it allows you to set up a different calendar, so to speak, so that you can run reports according to what you need to report on in terms of your company. Okay. So a pretty common use is redefining time periods. And I just want to make sure it's clear. It's not redefining what a month is. It's creating a new calendar, so you can use that new calendar, and that's a redefined month. A great example of a redefined calendar are people who follow more of a counting calendar of a 4-4-5. And what that means is a quarter is 9 weeks, or a quarter is 13 weeks. 13 weeks are divided up by 4 weeks, 4 weeks, and 5 weeks. And the first 4 weeks is 1 month. Second 4 weeks is the second month. The last 5 weeks is the third month. Now, if you look at a calendar on the wall, months don't always naturally fall into that nice little pattern, so you have to redefine the definition of a month, such as perhaps the month of June, meaning it actually is from June 5th to July 2nd, which is a 4-week window. Okay. Or those of you who are on like a federal calendar, the federal fiscal year is not January 1, it's October 1. And October 1 to September 30th. So Q1 for many people is happening right now for 2012, and that Q1 is defined as October 1st, 2011 to December 31st, 2011. And when you're running reports to say, what's my Q1 totals, Q2 totals, you basically have to define a new calendar in OpenAir. And you do that through this custom time ranges, and I'll show you an example of that. However, if you never had these types of redefinition requirements, there's ways that you can still use the custom time ranges that are beneficial to your company. And specifically, it's to format time periods for the report to show information in a more readable way. An example I have on the screen here that I coded in our system is something to show you kind of prior year, current year breakout by quarter, and then current quarter breakout by month, and then future. Okay, so you can actually use the custom time ranges to define a report like this. So it's maybe closer to the way that you may have done big financial spreadsheets in the past, where you can collapse columns and expand columns and look at Q2 and look at Q1. You can't really do the collapse and expand, but you can mimic that sort of data view by creating a custom time range. So let me show you that in the system. And here's that exact example that I have. So prior to 2011, how many hours have we worked based on the types of resources we have in our company, and quarter by quarter information. But for this current quarter, I want to see the details for October, November, December. And of course, you can see, current month is sort of in progress. Future months have no actual time. And then, of course, future is where I'm forecasting resource needs outside of this current year. Okay. So how did I define this? How did I get this nice formatting? And that's the custom time range feature. So it's back on the administration module. For those of you in the account module viewpoint, it's under company custom time ranges. Oh, not custom calculations. So here's the crazy custom time range that I defined. And every row now becomes a new time period. So I have the prior to 2011 row. It has a start date of way back in 2006 when I started using my system. And it ends the day before row 2, which is December 31st, 2010. And then I just defined Q1, Q2, Q3, and every date is the start date, and the end date is automatically generated by the day before the next row. And then I broke out October, November, December, future, and then ended it back in at the end of next year. Okay. So, if you wanted to have, well, can I create one that has a Q1 breakout and a Q2 breakout and a Q3 breakout? Absolutely. But just make sure people understand what the meaning of the custom time range is, and you'll probably have to give it a very descriptive name so people understand how to use it in reports. So how do they use it in reports? You can see this has basically 8 periods, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. The end doesn't count as a period. It's more of an end marker. If I go into the report, the time periods that I'm picking, I'm actually picking my new custom time range, and I'm saying I want 8 periods. So it's going to index into that time range, and it's going to figure out I want 8 periods, and it knows there's 8 rows in there. And I just tell it when do I want to start. Okay, so I wanted to start on January 1st. If I wanted to start on June 1st, I'll get an error. The reason I'm going to get an error is because I'm telling the system that I want to start my custom time range in the middle of the time range, which is not, there's not 8 periods left in the time range. There's actually only, let's see, Q2, Q3, which is June, and then we have October, November, December, so, and then the future. So there's 5 time periods left. So there's 5 rows left if I index into it on June 1st. And here I am, Q2, Q3, Q4 breakout, and then the future, so there's the 5 time periods. Okay. So the custom time ranges are actually a way that you can format the data, probably ways that you're sort of, maybe you're downloading everything in a month, throw it in a spreadsheet, and then you're using the collapse and expand features in Excel. You can mimic that in OpenAir. It's a little more work, but at least you won't have to have spreadsheets floating around in email. Okay, the next topic I wanted to introduce is date-effective custom fields. So some of you may have the need, I have a contractor, they switch to an employee. Well, how you're handling today, maybe you're closing the contractor record and you're opening up a new employee record because you really just don't have the ability to say, as of this date, you became an employee, because you just change the drop-down from one value to another, and then everything historically becomes that new drop-down value. Okay. There are ways that you can track information that you need to add to the system with date effectivity, and that's something called tag groups. Tag groups are something that are available on the user records, and you define tag groups so that you can actually set current values and then what the historical values are. Examples of things like this are when people move between departments, they move between offices, they change their status with the company, or maybe they start contributing cost to a different cost center. If you're using the cost center functionality, that's a great example of date control. The cost center functionality in OpenAir, the day that you change a cost center on that user record, that actual save date timestamp is when the cost center value changes in the system. And you can't sort of reach in there and change that date to control, well, it was supposed to be, last week. I just got to it today. Okay. So if you need to fix records, that's a database update behind the scenes to say, well, the last 5 days worth of stuff should have been against a different cost center. But from a reporting perspective, if you'd rather not have to maintain the data that way, if you can sort of use custom fields to organize the data in the right date frame, you could use this tag group and say, as of last Tuesday, Jody was in this part of the organization, and then run cost reports according to that and not use the cost center functionality. I'm not saying that would work for everyone, but that's a consideration depending on the challenges you may have with reporting. So here's a great example of what I did in the system just to kind of demonstrate and show you how that data effectivity works. I have a field called location, like where are my consultants physically in the company. And this person actually used to live in Texas and then moved from Texas to California as of a certain date. Obviously something important for me to understand from a payroll perspective, hours perspective, so forth and so on. So I set up these tag groups, and the tag group actually has a historical date record, if you can see it. May 25th to October 20th, this person lived in the state of Texas, and now they live in California. Okay? Well, then what are my time commitments? How many hours were spent in each of those locations? Okay? I could certainly pull that data from timesheet data if I have the timesheet configured that way, but it's really just in general, where did that person live? Okay? So I could run a report that says, I'm going to subtotal by this person's location, this tag group, this custom field value, and say based on where that person was, how many hours were they booked and how much time did they spend? And if you look at this snippet of a report that I have, and I'll run it in the system so you can probably see it a little bit better. If you look at the user tag entity snapshot here as a reference, in the month of August they were living in Texas, so everything is reporting under Texas. In the month of September, same thing. In the month of October, there was actually a split, so some of the time actually was spent in the state of California and some of them in Texas. And if you look at the results, you can see how the information is being reflected that way according to that date. And of course, if I wanted to verify it was actually on the 20th, I would have to refine this report to be a little more granular. But then if you look at the month of November, everything's being reported under California now, not Texas. Okay? So a great way to sort of, when people change status or change location and you need to make sure the values are in the right reporting group, you can consider using tag groups. It does add another index to your database. It may slow down some reports to some extent. So it's something that I would definitely encourage you playing in like a sandbox environment first to see if it will work for you before you turn it on in the system. But it is one of those features when you turn on the system, unless you use it, it's not going to do anything. Okay. So if I show you in the system an example of the same right here, here's the tag report. And I'll show you the display first. So just a simple basic hours report for the past 4 months, but I've actually subtotaled it by this field called user's location. And if I scroll all the way down, the user's location is way down here, user's location. Okay. And when I run the report, I'll get the information spread across those two different states for that resource. So where is this? Where is this tag group thing? For those of you who are using the administration module, it actually is right smack dab on the tag groups. You could define tag groups on the main page, and it's something called an optional feature. Okay, so down here in the account optional feature, you'll see a checkbox that says Enable User Tag Feature. Okay, for those of you who are still under the account UI, go to that company and settings form, and that's where you can turn on user tags. And then you'll be able to, on the account page, be able to set up the tag groups directly there. Okay? Extended date filters. So I think some of you may have this turned on and not even realize that it's an option, and why would you even use it? Okay? So I talked about the dates and importance of the date fields that come standard on the summary report. But there are a whole other series of dates that you can add to reports, and I like to call it extended date filtering, but it's really anything else that you want to be able to index. Like if you run detail reports, you get a whole series of fields that you can filter on by date: create date, accounting date, submitted date, so forth and so on for timesheets, for example. Right? Some of you have this stuff turned on your summary reports, and let me just kind of kind of show you what that is. So down on the bottom of your, this is an example of the report that I'm going to run. Down on the bottom of your summary reports, you have all these additional fields showing up. Okay, so way down here, and you may, this is just an example, but you have custom field dates. There are date fields that you've added to certain places in the system on user records and project records, and you probably added them for a reason, so you may end up needing to filter on them. So great, add them to summary reports as an example. For timesheets, for example, date filters may be useful, but you can add them for everything. You may see this date list show for purchases, invoices, expenses, so forth, and you've perhaps sort of wondered, well, what would be the use of doing this, and why are they even showing up? Okay, so let me ask the why they're showing up question first. Let me answer that question first. If you're not aware of it, it's actually something you can configure in the system. In reporting options, and for those of you who are in the account form, it's on that huge company settings. There's a whole bunch of enabled date filter capabilities, and the reason these sections of date filters are showing up on the summary report is because you have them turned on. Okay, so for those of you who are system administrators, you may want to just kind of double check and say, would you ever use any of these date filters? And the one that I know that is useful is the timesheet date filter, and I'll show you an example right now. But custom date filters, you've added the dates for a reason, so I don't see why you shouldn't turn those on. But the rest of them, it may just be noise, extending the size of the summary form for a little benefit. So what's an example of how this would be useful? And I have to say, the main example I can show you is really a financial or accounts payable example for cost accruals of vendors that have late time entries. Okay, so an example is today somebody that I have as a subcontractor realized, oh, I forgot to put my timesheet in for September. Okay, and so they're scrambling to hurry up and put their timesheet in September, and they submit it. Okay, well, I've already closed the September book, so now I have a situation of what am I going to do? I knew they did work, and I'm going to do a best guess as I think I have this much cost accrual. So you can actually run reports to sort of see, well, what cost should have hit my books in September, but they're going to hit the books in October now because they put their timesheet in late. And the configuration for that is, in this example, I want September time that was not entered in September. Okay. So the time report itself, I'm going to use those date fields to say the timesheet date is the time entry date. Okay. I'm going to use the time period to say it's last month, which happens to be September. But then I'm going to use these special date filters all the way at the bottom of the company summary report. And I say, but I want to know if the timesheet was created outside of my acceptable range for submission, which is later in October. Okay. So if I set this type of report up and I run it and something comes up, that means that cost that I should have incurred in September has been late, and I'm going to have to incur in October, even though it may, it's a cost accrual situation. Okay, and just to kind of refresh your memory on what that looks like on the report itself. Oh, that's my expenses example. So if I do, I want September time, okay, and I'm going to use this time entry date default. But I want to know whether September time was entered in the month of October. Okay, I could do it this way. I'd really recommend you use the custom range because October 1st would probably be a viable day for you to actually get September time. So 10, 11. Something like that. And when you run this report, then it's going to do that double index, and it's going to give you that information that you're looking for. If you find that you never have a need for these type of date filters, I would recommend turning them off because it really does clean up the company summary report form or the summary report form. and it makes it easier for people to sort of get their head around the fields that they have to fill out. The last two topics really quick are detail report subtotaling. So I just want to kind of highlight, there's a lot of flexibility on summary reports. I think you're familiar with that, and now that I've shown you some more features, it's very apparent. But there is a feature on the detail report that I think not enough people realize you can do. They'll still maybe download stuff on a summary report and then use Excel to count stuff, or summarize it. And what that is subtotaling. There's a count function now on detail reports that allows you to basically do a subtotal, and it'll do the count for you. And in fact, sometimes it'll actually add stuff together for you and do a count. So in its most simple case, like the screenshot example that's on the screen here, I did a count of give me the number of people that are in each of these job codes. Okay? And when I created that report, it was a user detail report. I said job code, then count, and I'll walk you through how I created that. The job code, then the word count. And when you use the word count, OpenAir is looking for you to check this box down here that says subtotal rollup. And then when you run it, it just comes up with this real simple response, okay? Which is great, but let's do something a little bit more robust, a little bit more supportive of metrics, right? So how about give me the total value of projects by the different ways that I've been able to bring them in the house, like Salesforce, for example, and how many of those projects in each of those areas have I gotten, okay? If I have client references or partners or marketing campaigns, how much revenue has that brought in the door, and how many projects did that equate to, okay? You can use a detail report with subtotaling to get that information very quickly, and that's exactly what's on the screen here, okay? Because what you do is you basically say, give me the sales source, and the budget, and then count. And when you do that budget and count, budget is a number field, so it knows it can total that as well. So it'll add up all of the 9 different projects here for the total budget of 157, as an example. You'll notice in the column here, though, I also have a drill down capability because I can actually open this up and see what projects they were to make up this total of 9. So what were the 9 projects that I got? So you can actually do a little rudimentary subtotaling, not just from a count function, but from a drill down perspective as well. So if I go into projects, so I picked my custom field called sales source, the name of the project, how much is it worth, and count. Okay, if I did like budget hours, for example, it would also add up total hours. Hit OK, and then I run this report. And if I wanted to, I could just click into this and it would open everything up and show me the individual projects that are contributing to this total. Okay? So a way to almost get a summary report, but it's through the detailed interface. And the last topic before I open it up for questions is, before you run to the report interface, you may actually be able to get what you want by using list views or just looking in the modules. And one thing, those of you who are on the phone that have known me for a while know that I'm very big on this feature called time entries. It's a wonderful feature, and it's very easy to look data up without having to use the detailed time entry report. And if you don't have it turned on, it's an internal switch that you can have OpenAir turn on. It's just enable the time entry tab. And when it shows up, it actually converts every timesheet into individual records by individual row by individual day. And all the values that you can see on a timesheet are available to display as columns here. Very nice, easy way to look data up. But you don't have to go to the reports module. You don't have to run report, oh shoot, I forgot the right date filter, modify report, rerun it, that kind of thing. You can just use your normal date filtering function, column pull downs, that kind of thing. Even the page filter that says give me everyone that has the word Jody in it, give me all the Jodys in the company. So if you're not using this, I do encourage you to turn it on. It doesn't hurt to turn it on. And it's also role-based, so you can actually prevent people from seeing it if you want, but administrators would have access to it. Do want to thank everyone for attending. I hope you found this beneficial and helpful. If you need to know anything else, obviously you can get a hold of us, phone calls, emails. We do have a Top Step tweets. We tweet out weekly tips to everyone. We are active participants in the OpenAir LinkedIn users group. And as always, we are continuing these expert user webinars. I hope you found them helpful, and if you want to listen to any of the prior ones, they are available on our website as recordings, and you can also request the slides if you would like a copy. So thanks again, everyone, for joining, and I appreciate your support.
Thank you. Great.